Tom McInnes. Thomas Robert Edward MacInnes, née McInnes, October 29, 1867, February 11, 1951, was a Canadian poet and writer whose writings ranged from vigorous, slangy recollections of the Yukon gold rush Lonesome Bar 1909 to a translation of and commentary on Lao-tzu's philosophy, The Teaching of the Old Boy. His narrative verse was highly popular in his lifetime. Life. He was born Thomas Robert Edward MacInnes in Dresden, Ontario. He moved to New Westminster with his family in 1874 and grew up there. His father, Thomas Robert MacInnes, served in the Senate of Canada from 1881 to 1897 and as Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia from 1897 until 1900. MacInnes was educated at University College, Toronto, graduating with a B.A. from the University of Toronto in 1887. He studied law at Osgoode Hall Law School in Toronto, Ontario, and was called to the bar in 1893. MacInnes served as secretary to the Bering Sea Claims Commission in 1896 and 1897, and for part of 1897 was a member of the Yukon Special Police and Customs Force at Skagway. He acted as private secretary to his father, the Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia, from 1898 until 1900, when the elder MacInnes was dismissed from the office. He was still spelling his surname McInnes as of 1916. MacInnes spent long periods in China, where he had business interests, between 1916 and 1927. One source says that he returned to Canada with a lifelong hatred of communists and Chinese. MacInnes wrote a series of articles on his Chinese experiences, published in 1926 in the Vancouver Morning Star and Vancouver Province, that became the basis of his 1927 book, Oriental Occupation of British Columbia. According to more than one sources, the book proposes that British Columbia adopt apartheid-like policies in dealing with what MacInnes perceived to be an undesirable influx of Chinese immigrants. Another source, though, calls Oriental Occupation a pamphlet, says that MacInnes had developed a sympathy for Orientals living in British Columbia, and says that the pamphlet reflects his views of British Columbia prejudice against Orientals. In Vancouver, MacInnes joined the Canadian Union of Fascists. He became a leading activist in the fascist scene, founding the Nationalist League of Canada. Writing. MacInnes's poetry was popular in Canada in the first half of the 20th century. He wrote light, easy verse that dismissed smugness and respectability with unconcerned humor. An amused detachment underlies his work, as though poetry were merely one form of expression as good as any other. He believed that joy and delight, rather than the prevalent melancholic outpourings of the soul, were essential to poetry. MacInnes can be compared to Robert Service, not least in the fact of their popularity in Canada at the time. Like Service in his Yukon and war poems, MacInnes was especially interested in examining man within a natural landscape on the fringes of society. Also, like Service, his rhythms are often forced and pedantic, his rhyme schemes careless and rough. In some ways, MacInnes seems to have modeled his career on that of Service. His first published work, A Romance of the Lost 1908, is a long yarn in rhyme about the Klondike Gold Rush, in the manner of the poems in Service's 1907 breakthrough work, Songs of a Sourdough. In 1913, MacInnes released Rhymes of a Rounder on the heels of Service's 1912 Rhymes of a Rolling Stone. Unlike Service, though, MacInnes was intrigued with elaborate poetic forms such as the villanelle, and actually invented a 5-line stanza of his own he called the Mayo. Catherine Hale, reviewing MacInnes's first book in the Mail and Empire, pronounced that the best poem is The Damosel of Doom, an airy, dreamlike, passionate piece suggested by the teaching of publications. Poetry collections. A Romance of the Lost. Montreal, Disparates and Company, 1908. Lonesome Bar, A Romance of the Lost and Other Poems. Montreal, Disparates and Company, 1909. In Amber Lands, 1910. Rhymes of a Rounder. North Vancouver, BC Review P. 1912. New York Broadway Publishing, 1913. The Fool of Joy. Toronto, McClelland, Goodchild and Stewart, 1918. Roundabout Rhymes Charles G. D. Roberts, FWD, 1923. The Complete Poems of Tom McInnes. Toronto, Ryerson P. 1923. High Low Along, a Didactic Poem, 1934. In the Old of My Age, 1947. Books. Prose. Chinook Days, 1926. Oriental Occupation of British Columbia. Vancouver, Sun Publishing, 1927. The Teaching of the Old Boy. London, Toronto, J. M. Dent, 1927. Edited. Christian Klengenberg of the Arctic. London, Cape, 1932.